Good evening and welcome to the August 9th meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting of the Grafton Planning Board is being conducted with both in-person and remote participation by board members and members of the public. Remote participation by the public for the public comment agenda item, any public hearings, of which there are none tonight, and any other matter for which the board allows public participation will be by the Zoom Q&A or raise hand feature. When using Q&A to ask a question or make a comment, your comment or question will be read and responded to at an appropriate point in the proceedings. If you raise your hand on Zoom, you will be enabled at an appropriate point to enter the meeting via voice or video to make a comment or ask a question. In all cases, whether in person or remote, please identify yourself by name and address for the record. And because we have at least one planning board member participating remotely, in this case 3, all votes will be taken by roll call. And please note that this meeting is being recorded as well as being broadcast live on the Grafton Community Television Government Channel. Having said all that, we begin by calling a roll of the board members. Justin Wood.
Here.
Bob Hassinger.
Here.
Linda Hassinger.
Here.
Prabhu Venkatraman.
Here.
And I, David Robbins, seem to be here as well.
And Moore just joined Zoom.
And Moore McCormick, the associate member.
Here.
Very good. And here with us is staff Chris McGoldrick.
Present.
And staff Natalia Allward.
Here.
Great. So let's proceed with our agenda. Our first agenda item is public input. If there are any members of the public who wish to speak on an issue that is not currently on the agenda, then now would be the time to do that. Seeing no members of the public in the room and no attendees, I will therefore assume that there is no public input for tonight, so we will proceed into our discussion items. The first of which is any updates on the fire sprinklers and new projects topic.
Yeah, so I didn't know if the board members, if there was any additional questions that they wanted to pose to the fire department in regards to this project. I did have a brief discussion with Mike Colleen in kind of thinking this through and how this might apply, how we may want to utilize this. I was looking at our fee schedule as part of our subdivision rules and regs update. And in terms of scales of projects, we may want to, consider at a certain number of units that we require sprinklers to be included. What I was looking at is our current fee schedule in terms of a preliminary plan and a definitive plan, right around 30 units, or actually exactly at 30 units. The preliminary plan no longer provides a cost benefit to the developer. So that may be a good point to trigger at least inclusion of, requiring or otherwise encouraging a developer to include fire sprinklers in those units. We may want to try to dial that in, get some input from developers in terms of building costs and if that is feasible, or if in terms of scales of projects and return on investment, or if they would, if that's going to need a larger amount to encourage that kind of including those in the units. But that's just some kind of thought that I had. I don't know if the board wants to kind of deliberate on that a little bit or mull it over and come back to it, but
I just have the feeling we're getting into an area that we don't know a whole lot about, and not really our expertise. I've seen a letter or two go by, but I haven't seen any hard sell coming from anybody for any particular things for us to do. I'm a little bit cautious when I see that our state decided not to include this requirement in their building code. I think there's a lot that we don't know about the subject, so I'm a little cautious. Obviously, it's nice to have the sprinklers. I would think putting sprinklers into developments would be a selling point for the developers, regardless. But I don't know. I have to see more about the point you were making, Chris. That might be a good one to look at. It might be viable.
Yeah, on my part, I haven't really given this much thought since our previous meeting, but kind of off the top of my head, I would think I would be thinking along the lines similar to what Bob just said. It sounds like a good idea. I think we would need a good deal more information, a better look at the pros and cons, the upside, the downside, the practicality aspects of it. Get some sense of some experience that other towns. I know the presentation there, the information that they gave us have mentioned a couple of towns where this has been done with some apparently generally positive results. But at least for me, quite a bit more information is needed. More thoughts along the lines. What you brought up, Chris, was some other thoughts and some other experiences with various incentives and the economics of everything and the marketability aspect. There's a lot that goes into this, not all of which this board has much expertise on. But I'd be happy to continue gathering information on that, and somewhere down the line, we very well could end up taking some action on that and kind of coordinating with the building department and other appropriate people, ultimately folding this into subdivision regs to whatever extent is necessary. But I think that there's probably some coordination between subdivision regs, building codes, and fire department, and probably a few other things.
And I for one would be interested in our neighboring towns and even Worcester County, if like what localities have adopted this rule and in what ways they require it or they offer it. Is it a venue that they allow longer dead end streets? Is it a venue that they require after a certain number of units? Do they require it for all subdivisions? Things like that would help at least gauge it to me. The presentation did say $3 to $5 per square feet, if I remember correctly, as a nationwide average, and it doesn't sound like much, but in the grand scheme of things, that could be enough to make a developer not want to build a development in Grafton versus Upton. And knowing that, like how other towns actually are adopting this would help for me.
Lynn and I listened to the video that was sent today. The one nearby town was Hopkinton, but they were talking about a combined 1,300 units that were all in negotiation. And if you've ever followed over in Hopkinton, things don't go easily with these things, particularly those projects. But a number of the suggestions and points that were put forward seem to be based on the idea that our rules were based on the fire department, and I'm sure that was and is a bit of it. But when we talk about dead end streets or the width of roads, that the fire department told us we should make wider, not narrower. I just think it's going to take our time, see what we can do.
Yeah, again, it doesn't sound like we would reject the idea out of hand, but I think we all would like more information.
I don't think there's anything right hot on the table for us. If interested parties want to come forward with ideas like Chris just suggesting something, well, we can look at them. But I don't think there's any champion sitting here tonight ready to drive it forward.
Right.
What I can do is I'll look into some of the, as you guys mentioned, the communities that have already implemented this. I'll also reach out and see if there are nearby communities that are looking at or in the process of adopting this to see what they're looking at. And I think we do have quite a bit of other priorities coming for the fall and winter, but perhaps in the spring we can have enough information collected to really make an effort, or to see if we can drum up some more support for this by that time.
I'm not sure that there's there's this subject with multiple possibilities. It isn't just like there's a question there, should we do X or not?
Yeah, as I said, I think this, in the end, this is likely to be a joint effort among the planning board, building department, fire department. Police department may or may not have some thoughts or something to contribute as well.
And I wonder how all that interacts with 40B projects in the ZBA.
Yes, I should say the ZBA should probably be paying attention to this as well.
Well, but there ought to be some sort of a coordinated attack, but I wonder how much ability they would have.
Yeah,
And that would be a thing to look into.
in terms of what 40B would allow them to do along these lines? Yeah.
Well, they can do anything they want, but then the appeal goes to Boston and gets thrown out.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's so sort of some realistic expectations of any limitations that the 40B process and legal history might have on consideration of including sort of a requirement like this in a comprehensive permit. Yeah, ultimately, I think our ZBA would like to have their comprehensive permits upheld if challenged. Much as we would like to have our decisions upheld if challenged.
We have a little more balanced opportunity, though, in
Yeah.
that area.
Yeah,
than
it's
what
not,
I've heard.
it's not the exact same situation. So, anything else on this topic for now? I think we do have some continuing effort here, and we will bring this back at such time as we have more information that's worthy of discussion by the board. Alrighty, moving on. The next discussion item is complete streets. Any update on that, Chris?
So I do, yeah. I have not finalized a draft for the board tonight, but what I have done is I did meet with the DPW director to discuss the program and to ask for their support of this program, to discuss potential impacts to their operations and what are their concerns. Make sure that DPW is a strong proponent in this effort and is included. In discussing that, obviously, one of their, I wouldn't say concerns, but one of their considerations is the language of the program when we do adopt a policy to score highly on that policy. We do need to require language that is somewhat binding, using terms like shall and will rather than may or may not. But in addition to that, as scoring highly, part of the policy is to have exceptions for the standards of complete streets, which can be fairly stringent, and in some cases may not really be the best choice in terms of topography or right-of-way width. And so what I'd like to do is write in exceptions, and the process in order to score highly on the policy needs to be very clear and very direct as to how that will play out, and not allowing very much discretion other than specific cases. So what I'd like to do is look at drafting a policy that has an exception that the select board can waive those requirements at the recommendation of the DPW director, for instances of, and we'll try to have a comprehensive list of those laid out of, right away with topography or other site conditions as needed. So I'm hoping that way we'll be able to, we'll certainly, I think, be able to meet our 80% on the rubric, but hopefully I'd like to get as close to 100 if we could, but which is the full
Yeah.
point list, but that can be fairly difficult to achieve. So
Yeah, as I recall, the essence of complete streets has to do with accommodating vehicle, bicycle, and pedestrian traffic.
correct.
And I think we know of certain roads in this town where that is essentially going to be impossible to meet. So we, as long as a policy acknowledges those realities, which is basically what I think you're getting at there, and we'll see how well that comes out.
Yeah, and I think the benefit of having that process, what it'll do is, when we look at part of it, the ADA ramps and things like that, it's to be inclusive of all modes of transportation, bicycle, pedestrian, ADA compliance, bus traffic, horses, if you will, any kind of, it's supposed to be more comprehensive. Some of the standards are the 5-foot sidewalks on both sides that in some more rural instances may not, you won't have the pedestrian traffic to really require that level of infrastructure. But what that policy and process will do is, rather than just moving ahead with the design of the project, it'll have us take one step and think about why is that not necessary, and put that in the public realm for discussion, I think, which will help to make these projects, as we improve our roads and infrastructure, it'll be somewhat more inclusive to all modes of transportation.
Yep, and just as a reminder, I'm interested in how that policy will ultimately influence the subdivision rules. And I don't want to hold up, we're working on subdivision rules revisions, we're approaching completion on that. And I wouldn't hold that up waiting for the complete streets policy, but what could happen is once we've adopted a complete streets policy, we may then have to issue a revision to the subdivision rules. Our rules, for example, currently require 4-foot sidewalks.
Correct.
And so we have to consider whether and how to incorporate a 5-foot sidewalk requirement. Again, possibly taking into consideration that 5-foot sidewalks may not always be appropriate even under complete streets, but that's for once we get the policy more fleshed out.
Yep.
I don't remember whether we actually changed it, but when I came on the board, I know that the rules said sidewalks on both sides. But then it got to be, everybody was getting a waiver for that. And I'm not sure whether we're still doing that or whether we actually changed the rule. We might be talking about changing it back again.
Yeah, right. The way the rule is now, on minor streets, it's a sidewalk on one side. Major streets, it's a sidewalk on both sides. So yeah,
Right.
that might be another area where the complete streets policy may necessitate a change in the subdivision rules.
Yeah, an example of the need to have flexibility. If you look at what the state has had to go through on Main Street in South Grafton, we've been years getting a design because they are trying to squeeze more street in than there is land. And that's going to be true for most cases, I think, or it's going to be
Yep.
really hard.
Yeah, I think that's sort of generally true with existing streets in particular. It's going to be very often a challenge to sort of fit the existing streets into the complete street mold. New streets, it's a little bit different, but even there you have to consider the context of the new streets.
I think we still have under the flex, whatever we call it now, but anyway, the flex version of subdivision. I know we had an encouragement to reduce the widths of streets
Yes.
from 50 down, and I think that might be a thing that we'd have to look at, and
Yeah,
you know,
which
that's gonna
reminds
make
me,
it harder.
yeah, and that is written into the zoning bylaw. So the complete streets may end up influencing, necessitating some adjustments to the zoning bylaw as well as the subdivision rules. So, there's, yeah, potentially there's any number of consequences that we have to think through and make sure that everything's going to work here. So, anything else for the moment on complete streets? We're mostly waiting for Chris to do some more writing.
Yep.
Okay. And moving on then, I assume under the topic of mill redevelopment, the ball is still in CMRPC's court.
Correct.
And moving on, next topic would be subdivision rules and regulations. We are still waiting more comments from Brian and from you, Chris.
Yep.
And I know you had mentioned you had offered it to VHB for comment, although I gathered that we shouldn't be holding our breath waiting for that.
Yeah, so I'll reach back out to VHB to see, in terms of, I have finalized my review, I just have not put it to formal paper, and then I'll include DPW as well as, I don't know if we had any updated from Graves, but I can reach back out to them as well.
Yeah, I know we did get something from Jeff. We got something from Brian, who said he would have more comments yet to provide us. So,
Yeah.
Kind of tickle Brian to make sure that we've got everything that he wants to say about this. And until we get those additional comments, I don't think there's anything the board can productively do.
Yeah, so I mean, I did go through mine, and I'll just say, most of mine were very minor comments. There were some that I think were a little bit substantive that the board can discuss, but again, I'll wait till I can get those in a formal memo with all the other comments as well, and
Yep.
we can dig into those.
Yep. Well, it's kind of gotten to the point where we want to try to make sure that from every relevant person's point of view, we've got a good product.
Yeah.
And I don't know, from what I've seen of the comments from Brian and Jeff, I very much appreciate those. And that's definitely going to be helpful in nailing down some of the fine points. In some cases, it's just outdated language that on my own I didn't catch.
Yep.
In other cases, it's there's some good discussion of various possible changes. So looking forward to getting the rest of that. At which point we can pull together another draft and work towards getting it ready for public hearing.
Yep.
Anything else on subdivision rules from the board for tonight? All right, last discussion item is restaurant/bar outdoor seating zoning. So what's up with that?
Yeah, so I wanted to add this to the list. So, as the board, I'm sure, is aware, we've been doing temporary outdoor seating permits for businesses. Obviously, as we track, and I know we had mentioned, as COVID numbers were reducing, that next year we may not be doing that. We may be looking at more permanent solutions to that. So this is a little bit twofold. I think we're going to continue to track numbers and see how that progresses. So we may want to consider doing temporary outdoor, depending upon how next season starts to shape up. But in the meantime, I would also like to look at developing that more permanent solution that we had discussed. I'd like to target fall town meeting, which is going to be a fairly tight turnaround to get on the warrant, but I think that's still achievable. So, this is something, as the temporary outdoor seating has been operating. I think we've seen a lot of benefits to the businesses. A lot of the businesses have reached out and would like to include more permanent solutions, including adding patio space and other amenities. I think we've seen some benefits in terms of vibrancy of the businesses, being able to see people outside enjoying those spaces. and I think there are benefits. There's obviously also concerns that came up this last round that we'll have to address, and I think a more permanent solution would be more adequate at addressing, including kind of traffic safety, and obviously we've included fire safety in that measure in terms of any extensive or extended tents being up. But I wanted to put that on the board's radar, and I don't, I'm just kind of beginning some of that research and looking at language, but I would like to see if we can include in our zoning bylaw some restaurant and bar outdoor seating for our zoning regs.
I think as a practical matter, our best hope is to target spring meeting.
Okay.
Because it is August, and the deadline for a warrant article for the October town meeting is right around the end of August, beginning of September. So we basically have, if we were going to do something for the fall town meeting, we'd have to have it already today. We'd have to have it pretty well spelled out.
But I do agree that, and I think also we need to reach out to the businesses that do it and get input from them. Really get some real input from them. I think it's very successful. And
Yep.
I think it really works. But to get a zoning article to the warrant is and we do have to do public hearing, I think, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
Zoning, yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it's a really big deal.
I almost every one of our restaurants and bars has a different set of issues, and so one size is not going to necessarily fit all.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what we're going to put in the zoning, except maybe something that says it's okay under whatever conditions to be able to do that activity outdoors, because I'm not sure that our zoning really explicitly says it's okay to have dining or drinking outdoors under any set of conditions. But it's, you get it. This is a seasonal thing, and you're going to get into for the parking lot tent situation. You're going to get into the parking question, and it's one thing when we put it in a more or less short term special permit amendment or whatever we call it. It's another thing to try to cover that base thoroughly in the law.
I think there's there's a fair amount of thought that in study that has to go into this. We have on occasion issued a special permit or a site plan approval that includes some permanently installed outdoor seating. I'm thinking the most recent one I can think of is Dunkin' Donuts. They have several tables outside. That was part of their design, and I don't remember off the top of my head whether that was a special permit or just a site plan. But in any case, that was we were able to accommodate some outdoor seating of a permanent nature, without a great deal of difficulty. One of the issues we had with these temporary arrangements was the various kinds of permits or just a grandfathered operation with no permit that some of these restaurants had. So it's like every one of their circumstances was different in terms of the existing permit structure. And then there's the consideration of explicitly accommodating temporary outdoor seating, as in a parking lot, as opposed to permanently installed outdoor seating, as in a patio. In fact, I think the Grafton Inn has a similar permanent outdoor arrangement. So there's permanent outdoor arrangements. There's temporary outdoor arrangements to think about, and sort of accommodating, sort of in the long term, a temporary arrangement like we've done the past couple of summers, which we've really done on kind of an informal basis to try to formalize that. I think it'll be an interesting task to work out what ultimately makes sense in terms of either a zoning bylaw or some alternative permitting structure, which I prefer not to have to invent our own wheel on this. And that's another thing, is to see what other communities are doing along these same lines, and try to come up with approaches that have already been shown to work, or that are commonly understood to be likely candidates, that sort of thing.
I'd like us to be clear about what we're fixing, what's broken that needs fixing, by the way.
Yeah.
And that, again, because every site is, practically every one is a different story, it's going to take a little doing. But I think, by the way, that we also gave approval years ago to the post office pub when they did their addition and on the right-hand
Yeah,
side.
I think I remember we found some sort of an approval on file for the post office pub. as well.
No, I remember doing it as part of somewhere along the way, because I wasn't there
Yes.
when I got there. But then you even have another flavor with what's happening up at Holden Farm, and that's an agricultural use, which makes it even more. Well, what are they allowed to do, and how does the agricultural exemption apply or not to a playground and
Yeah.
a beer tent, and so on?
Yeah.
So
It's
lots of things to keep busy with.
it's going to be interesting to try to develop something here.
Yeah, I'll say for me, once we get a very rough idea of where we want to take this, it might be useful for inviting the business owners in for like a workshop meeting that we might schedule off our normal open public meeting schedule, and
Well-
have business owners be optionally come in, maybe invite EDC to attend or join that meeting. That could be a way to get what they want out of it.
Even before we were to convene that meeting, it'd be nice to know whether some reasonable part of our restaurant and bar and EDC people think that something's broken, and then if they do, then get together and talk about it. Because I think you could convene one of those meetings, and some people could come in and say, everything's fine now, don't change it.
Yeah. Also, now, after 2 years, 2 summers of doing this, those restaurateurs and will have a better idea, better feel for how it's really worked, what benefits, what are the problems. And, we actually have some experience now, whether we wanted it or not.
Yep, and of course, no one knows how the COVID situation is going to play out over the next few months. It may be that by next spring or summer, no one's going to be interested in outdoor dining arrangements. Or it may be just the opposite.
Maybe, but it may be very successful. Without COVID. It's just hard to know.
Yeah.
I think the individual restaurants would know better
Yep.
how it's working for them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think their attractions are varied depending on which one you're at, but I get this feeling that at least some of the restaurant folks think that their customers really like having an outdoor option without getting into the question of
But not at
COVID.
freezing. But not in snowy weather.
well, I don't know, maybe the cross-country skiers need a place to stop along the way.
Yeah. No, I do remember having heard of at least a few comments along the lines of, outdoor dining has worked out pretty well. We'd like to be able to do it all the time. So, it's
It's still
I think I
seasonal,
tend to
though.
agree with what some of you guys have said. That part of this is hearing feedback from the restaurant operators. You get a sense of what they like, what they don't like, how they would like to see it proceed. Based on now 2 summers of experience, what's working, what works well, what could be improved. But, there's and again, there's so many. Every one of them is kind of a unique set of circumstances. So it's a challenge it'll be a challenge to get something figure out what, if anything, we want to do, you know, in terms of laws and regulations.
Yeah, so I think the spring target would likely allow us to review that in more detail and hash out
Yes.
some of those details. I would just ask, or I wouldn't ask the board to commit to anything now. Obviously, we don't know what we'll be looking at next spring, but given that timeline, I would just encourage the board to consider potential for doing outdoor dining as in a temporary fashion, as we've been doing until we can get a more formal solution established. Because I do know that a lot of the businesses, regardless of the COVID question, as you've discussed tonight, the restaurants have found that their patrons do really enjoy the outdoor option. So
Yeah, so basically, we have developed a kind of an informal process for, you know, approving that. That informal process, if nothing else, could work again next year, to whatever extent is necessary. For next year, taking into account some of the things that we've learned this year, some of the issues that came up this year that didn't come up last year. So there's that track, is, you know, basically, you know, continuing and refining the informal process we have, but at the same time, you know, taking a good look at what might be helpful in terms of the zoning bylaw or some other regulations or procedures to you know, kind of formalize this as a long-term thing.
understood.
So enough said on that for tonight, everybody.
At least,
Alrighty then, moving on to general business, we have a couple of bills to approve.
Sorry.
I move that we approve the bills and direct the planner to sign.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the board approve the bills and direct the planner to sign. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll call the roll. Justin?
Aye.
Bob?
aye.
Linda?
Aye.
Prabhu?
Aye.
And Dave votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We have no minutes of previous meetings. We have a staff report.
Yeah, so let me just pull up. Sorry. Yeah, so we've been continuing to work on the local rapid recovery program plan. Meeting with businesses. We're on our second round of interviews, looking at a number of projects. We came up with 12 potential projects with the consultant. We're kind of finalizing those with, you know, input from those interviews of the second round. And then hopefully once that's done, we'll kind of finalize the report, and I'll be able to bring those projects to the board for their consideration, and we'll move forward with looking at the implementation of those projects. A lot of them will kind of, I think, in terms of efforts, will really kind of mesh together in terms of implementation and what we specifically achieve. But looking at wayfinding and infrastructure is one of the big ones for the North Grafton area. What we've been finding is one of the challenges that we're working on resolving is how do you, in the North Grafton, New England Village area, how do you separate the industrial traffic of Washington Mills so that it works with potential expansion of any residential or recreational use in terms of the parks and other businesses there. You know, creating a park once and walk environment is, you know, nice for the vibrancy of the area, but we want to make sure that we also defend the Washington Mills and their traffic. So we're working on creative solutions for that, and that'll likely be one of the recommendations as we move forward on that program.
Build a tunnel.
Yeah,
Tunnel connecting the two Washington Mill properties.
it's true. We also, you know, one of the other recommendations, one of the other projects coming of that, other than the wayfinding, is potential for facade improvements or programs to either encourage or assist businesses in updating their facades. So more to come on that program, but we are getting to a point where there's a lot of meat to kind of dig into and discuss. So it's we're seeing a lot of progress there. We've also been meeting with a number of businesses, looking at 124 Westboro Road, which is DCAM property that's being marketed. We are getting some interest in that site for different types of development, so we're continuing to meet with those businesses and discuss potential for the development of that site as well. Nothing really substantial that I'd bring for the board, but just so you know that we are entertaining potential development proposals. So
Well, that's kind of nice to see some action, potential action on that parcel.
Yeah.
We were trying to, not too many years ago, there was what looked like a pretty promising prospect, but it fell through, and I'm glad to see there is continuing effort on that.
and then other than that, kind of just background work. Nothing that I think rises to the level of board action, but we're continuing to work on some background items, annual reports to different agencies in terms of 8 Pine Street, 40R developments, things like that. So
Okie dokie. Correspondence. One item of note is a letter from Bonnie and Tim Peary, notice of intent to convert approximately an acre and a half from chapter 61A to residential. This ultimately will trigger the town's consideration of a right of first refusal. As I recall, that process basically starts with the select board. The select board will take this and forward it for consideration to all of the relevant boards for a recommendation.
correct.
So this is strictly for our information at this point, because right now it requires no action whatsoever on the part of this board.
The little bit I see in the agenda doesn't even show anything about like how much they're, might have an offer for or anything like that. So
Yeah, no, this is in a case, what may or may not be this case, if the Pearies are going to convert it to their own residential use,
yep, that makes sense.
then there is no sale involved, which
Right.
is a variation on the usual process. If, on the other hand, they're selling that portion of land, then there would be an offer. There would probably have to be at least a proposed plan separating that parcel from the rest of it. So, this is, as I said, there's not enough information here for this board to act on, even if we wanted to. But again, it's premature for us to be spending much time thinking about it.
Is that in our correspondence file?
Yeah, it was added today.
Come on, guys. I'm interested in what parcel it is and how it might play into whatever. I've got to see some information first.
So I'll just note this letter was received today in our office. It was sent in today. That's why it was only added today. And again, this is really just notice for the board that it'll be forthcoming. It still goes to the select board first for their right of first refusal, and then it would come to the.
And by the time it comes to us for our recommendation, it should be supported by sufficient information for us to evaluate it.
Correct.
But was it added to the correspondence file, or is it someplace else that I just haven't?
It's in the correspondence file.
Because I thought I refreshed that shortly before the meeting started. Okay, anyway, go ahead.
There is an item in the correspondence file which doesn't really seem relevant to this board. A letter to Mr. Prisby. We can ignore that. It has no relevance for this board. The other thing in the correspondence file, and I really haven't had the time to read through it. It's from CMRPC, a local planning assistance FY22 program reminder. That's probably right now at this point it's simply sort of for our information. I haven't even, like I said, I haven't had time to read through it even to, to see what it's all. I assume it's basically describing what we have available to us and how to take advantage of it for LPA in fiscal year 22, which just started.
Correct. So that was from CMRPC discussing, the LPA hours and how that works. We generally get the maximum of 24 hours each year for our participation in CMRPC activities and membership on the boards. So thank you for those delegates. And it also outlines some of the services that they have, which include GIS development, mapping services, other types of grant writing, and other services that they generally provide. So as we look at the utilization of those LPA hours, that may be things, as we look at projects to be developed, that may be another way to utilize those. We're currently using the LPA hours for the mill overlay and redevelopment, as well as from time to time smaller projects or other projects. We typically tap CMRPC for those as well. So
Yeah, and I'm very familiar with this subject, of course.
Surprise.
All of our hours, or almost all of our hours, are due to my attending meetings. We can get up to 12. I just was exchanging messages about their memo, and I get over 30 meetings every year. So we're in pretty good shape of getting our full credit. They wouldn't dare not give it to us anyway.
All right. Anything else on correspondence that caught anybody's eye? Are there any reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC?
I did notice at last Thursday's physical development committee meeting at CMRPC that they've gotten quite a number of new people in the division that deals with community development, where the LPA hours usually end up. So there's been some turnover. They've got some good people, but there's been turnover, and I think that's been delaying some of the things that we've been interacting with. But they're marching on with good stuff.
Anything else?
On the library planning committee, I missed the last meeting. I was not well. But prior to that, I think a couple of weeks ago, we had the preview for the library inauguration. Last I knew, I'm not too sure we are going to have this grand opening with the COVID conditions and the cases spiking. I don't have an exact update from the last meeting, but I think it was going as per plan, the move from the temporary facility to the permanent facility and so on and so forth. Nothing concrete from my end, but overall, it's going as per plan, well within the approved budget and the additional funding that they were able to mobilize.
Okay. Anything else? Any other items which may lawfully come before the board?
I did. For staff report, I did want to add one item. So the planning board or planning department staff will be hosting a public discussion for 25 Worcester Street at the new library facility on August 25th, which is not, it's a Wednesday, the 25th, a couple weeks from now. That'll be at 7 p.m. in the new Grafton Library, so it'll allow us to kind of open that space up to the public and host the meeting, and we'll be discussing the 25 Worcester Street. We've received a lot of public comment about what would like to be seen there, and so we're going to try to have a public discussion session to discuss possibilities for that site and get some public feedback and input, which we'll then bring to the various boards as well. So
25.
I'll be sending out a flyer for that on the town email, as well as other various ways, GCTV. So that'll be coming soon. I we just recently put that flyer together. So
All right. Does anybody feel compelled to vote to extend the meeting past 10 o'clock tonight?
I could vote to extend it, but it won't matter.
Yeah, because I'm gonna move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor? Justin?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
Linda?
Aye.
Prabhu?
Aye.
Dave votes aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.